Why does a company like Apple become one of the largest companies in the whole world versus Research in Motion, the makers of BlackBerry, basically go out of business? As somebody who's a 13th generation family farmer and someone who's been operating a 9-figure business for over a decade, I have some thoughts on why certain companies continue to grow and they last versus other companies might grow really quickly, but they also fall really quickly as well. The world's oldest company, it's called Kongo Gumi, or I probably butchered that, but it's a Japanese construction company that's a little under 1,500 years old. Having a company for 1,500 years is pretty incredible because most companies just simply don't last. One wise person once told me that the role of a company is to delay bankruptcy, because that's what's eventually going to happen. To a staggering fact, even the large companies like the Fortune 500 companies, over half of companies that were Fortune 500 companies in the year 2000 are now bankrupt or being sold for parts. So even in the last 20-something years, over half of the largest companies are not here today. People often talk about examples like Blockbuster being replaced by Netflix, or how whole industries have been wiped because of certain internet companies. But this is also true for a lot of other businesses that come up really quickly and then they die. Technology disruption is often credited as one of the main reasons why companies go out of business. Certain technology emerges that replaces the other technology. If you're interested in this, there are amazing books around disruptive innovation. One of my absolute favorite companies in the whole world is Craigslist. It is still one of the most popular websites in the world, believe it or not. Seems like the owners and the team are having a lot of fun. They're not working that hard. And supposedly that company does like $1 billion in revenue with 900 million of profit. And if they just turn on a function like you pay a little bit for a car post, suddenly the revenue shoot up like 100 million. So actually they're monetizing a fraction of how much they could monetize, but they've been building a company to last, not just to maximize profits on the short term. And therefore they're probably enjoying the fruits of their labor. In this video, I want to share 5 ways how you can build a company that lasts and give examples of the opposite of companies that didn't last and why. Lately, you might have seen press hits about companies like Gully Nutrition that was selling these apple cider vinegar gummies and how they were sold for parts after an incredible run. Or Hello Bello that was started partly by Dax Shepard and Kristen Bell and had this meteoric rise to supposedly 400 million in revenue and then went bankrupt. There are also stories around Prime Nutrition that has been another miracle growth ride lately. And some people are saying that they're on their way down now. I don't know if any of these are true. These are just stuff that I read on newspaper coverage. Obviously the bankruptcies are public, but these are things that I hear and I've seen over and over again in my time of doing business. One of the first mistakes I see these rabbit companies doing is that they make a lot of illegal claims. They make claims that are very bold, often things that you can't back up and that are not aligned with here in the US FTC's regulations. So they say things like they can cure an illness or they can fix a thing or they will make you smarter. They can't back up and prove that it will make them smarter. But I've seen over and over again that there's a lot of upstart companies that are willing to take a lot of risks because they have nothing to lose. So they make claims, maybe because they don't know, maybe because they're lazy, but probably mostly because they work. If you make these claims that you cure an illness, you're gonna sell a lot of product. Or if you say that you're gonna lose 10 pounds in 2 weeks, people are gonna buy it. And that's gonna help you grow your revenue really quickly, get a lot of new trial, a lot of new users, not only new customers. Is that sustainable? In most cases, not. Once the company becomes bigger, then folks, different lawyers and FTC are gonna have you on your radar. When you're teeny tiny, they don't have the bandwidth to litigate everyone here and there. But once you get bigger, and maybe because of lobbying from other large incumbents, those companies get sued. They often lose the lawsuits, lose a lot of money, and end up going bankrupt. There's a whole industry looking at these claims and suing people at left and right or litigating them. And some of them are like kind of tedious, like Red Bull had a lot of famous cases about their claims that they might have like won in some parts. And then there's like truly illegal stuff that people get caught with. But what I've seen from companies that do well is that they build a brand and they make claims they can back up, like macronutrient claims in food and nutrition is like how much calories, how much protein, or what ingredients is there. Like there's a tea with lavender and chamomile is not a claim because if there is lavender and chamomile, you're good. You're not saying that this will make you sleep like a baby. You're not promising anything. Or if you're really clever, you can say things that are buffery, that don't really mean anything. Four Sigmatic, for example, has a very popular calm cacao product. And it's a product that hopefully supports you with occasional stress in the evenings in the form of a healthy and delicious hot cocoa. And we would have on our packaging a quote that said, like a hug from grandma. That's called a buffery claim. It doesn't really mean anything. It leaves a lot of imagination to the end consumer, but we're not claiming that we're gonna make you sleep better. We're just saying it's like a hug from grandma and you can interpret it whatever you want. Another thing that I've noticed with companies that come and go is that they focus a lot on a trend. Usually they hopefully catch the trend early. They try to ride a wave, and it's a good wave. The trend example could be like keto. I knew a lot of keto companies that did really well when everybody was Googling and looking for keto products. And that can be like a possible strategy to run and establish trends early on and leverage them. When you're small, you don't have a lot of things going for you. You don't have probably money, you don't have a big customer list, you don't have relationships. So leveraging a trend like that is a good thing for a while, but that wave ends. And if everything is based on that wave, let's say keto, and then people are no longer interested in keto, what do you have left? My advice there is to add value that's relevant in 100 years from now. So if 100 years from now, give or take, there's still value to what you're offering, that's probably still helpful to sell. Whatever the trends or fads are, they come and go. For example, if your product is keto, means it's like low carb, for example, but what if it's also delicious and affordable? If you have a delicious and affordable product that also happens to have less sugar, that's probably a winning long-term proposition. But if you have a keto product that's like a bad version of a cookie and it costs twice the much, when people stop caring about keto, they're probably not gonna buy not as good of a cookie that's double the price if there's cheaper and tastier options out there. In technology, there's a lot of good examples of this too. Is like, think of like Apple computers and them riding a wave of personal computers and then branching out to mobile phones. And they were driving a lot of innovation in smartphones per se. But what they did is they made products that made people's life easier and that looked good and that were intuitive and made them more creative, for example. And there was a market for that, and there's probably a market for that for a long time. Now, the bar might change over time, but what they were offering is something that is probably relevant 100 years from now. Another example is Amazon. Amazon is all about like having a lot of options with a lot of transparency if the options are good with the reviews and ratings and rankings that are delivered to you quickly and affordably. And quickly and affordably is like something of value probably a long time from now as well, because people want convenience and affordability. So that's a winning value proposition as well. They were early on in internet and having all the world's bookstore than a bookstore that only had 5,000 books or 10,000 books. They could have 100,000, a million books. But what they then used that initial wave is to build supply chain and affordability, and that paid dividends a lot. The other thing that companies that last a long time usually do is that they have sound unit economics or financials. I've seen so many venture funded food and beverage startups or mushroom companies even come and go. They raise a lot of money, they burn a lot of money. The growth is incredible. They look like a success story outside. And me as an operator with very little money, I'm like, damn, you become jealous. You're like, they're just crushing it without knowing the backstory until years later. So I'm like, wow, they're growing so much. Why can't we grow that much? Then you find out years later that they were making no money. They were just losing money all the time and it get funded until one day, it's like the game of musical chairs. The music ends and there's no more chairs available, somebody to fund you. In my space, there was, for example, this European company that we knew called Your Super that started out a little bit after us and came to the US just like us. And they were making these certain products, selling them big bundles online for like a detox program. And that product, they were able to raise a lot of venture funding and acquire customers online. And for a long time, they had a great business. And then one year we read a newspaper article that that company was sold for like liabilities, I guess, or like very little money from a stock swap. I don't know what the real story is behind the scenes, what really happened, but seems like they were not able to be profitable, and then there was no more money available, and then it became somewhat of a fire sale. We also have another competitor called Lair Superfoods, which is actually a pretty cool company. They went public super early on as a pretty small company to be public, and they raised a lot of money, and their financials are public, so I know these are to be true. And their gross margins were like 20%. So for every $10, the product itself costed them $8, and the rest was like $2 and change. And most companies to survive, you need to have like $4 of margin. And that's not to be greedy. It's because like without that, you can't pay your employees, you can't pay your rent, you can't pay your fixed expenses, let alone be profitable. For quarter after quarter, I've followed Laird and them just losing money. It seems like they're about to turn things around, but they burn tens of millions of dollars of just having too low of a margin. So when you launch a company, often you're the consumer too. So you're like, I don't want to be too expensive for my customers, and you shouldn't. You need to be competitive. At the same time, the first rule of sustainability is financial sustainability. If you run out of cash, you run out of business, you can't serve your customers or employees anymore. So you need to have money in the bank, and therefore you need to have sustainable unit economics. The flip side of having healthy unit economics is that you need to offer more value than what you're selling for. You need to give more than what you're taking. Even with physical products, like even if you need to have healthy unit economics, you can give in so many different ways. At Four Sigmatic, we've done so many free events. We've given so many free products to places. We've had like a free mushroom academy where you could learn about mushrooms for free, even beyond our products. If there's ways how you can add more value than others. Also, the product itself hopefully adds more value. In our case, our product costs the same as other third wave coffees, but they're not organic and they're not functional. So they don't have the mushrooms and they're not necessarily certified organic like we are. So as a consumer, you pay the same as these other companies, but we give you an organic product that's functional. And that's been a winning proposition in retail stores around the country. Another good example of that is boxing and UFC. Boxing used to be the big martial arts, especially with income. There was boxers like Floyd Mayweather that made like 400 million on like 3 fights. And they were extracting a lot of value with the pay-per-view, but then the product maybe didn't always deliver. There was less fights, less often. And then those fights didn't feel like as good of an entertainment versus UFC that put on a lot of fights. Not every fight is great, but they put so many fights that were gems all over. And there was a lot of fights that were on TV or otherwise affordable to watch. You didn't have to pay per view for everything. UFC over the last 20 years have completely taken over the sport of boxing. And it's just like a fundamentally a better product, and they're getting a lot of new fans. I think what you can take there is, yeah, in the short term, the boxers probably got paid a lot more than the UFC fighters, and the boxing promoters made a lot more money than the UFC people. They were broke, on the verge of bankruptcy. That was not ideal. But now, if you're a UFC fighter, or many UFC fighters, they make a really good income versus very few boxers can still make an income there. So it's a lot harder in boxing, and whereas there are way more good UFC fighters making decent income, and the UFC overall is doing much better. Last thing that I've seen with companies that come and go versus companies that last is how they take care of their other stakeholders. We've talked about the consumers and customers. That's very important. And we've talked about internal finances, but how do you take care of your key partners, such as your manufacturing partners, and even your own employees? There are a lot of examples of companies that have had issues with those two things. Two that are known to be somewhat public is Hello Bello, and there was a lot of issues with their contract manufacturing. I don't know all the details that happened behind the scenes, but sounds like they were not fully aligned, and sounds like similarly with the case of Goli, a manufacturer that came and took over the business as well. But it is very important to take care of your partners. Like in Four Sigmatic case, like the farmers earning a living wage and the supply chain. It can be sometimes tough because there's financial realities. So like everybody has to give up a little bit, but you need to care for those people. Otherwise, it's kind of tough. And I've made this mistake too, is like assuming that every employee will care as much as I do. They absolutely don't, because like they're not the founders and owners of the business. So also understanding that they have their own career objectives and needs and other stresses in life that are not work related. Having a balance there, it's very hard, but it is these triple bottom line conscious capital businesses that end up often lasting a long time, that care about their key partners and suppliers and their employees. And the companies that just try to extract value maximum everywhere might be more profitable or grow faster in the beginning, But if there's no sustainable partnership there, then it often goes away. Good example of this is Costco. Costco is known to be really tight with like margins with their vendors. They want the best possible price for their members, which are the Costco members. So they squeeze in a way really hard to make sure there's best possible value. But they're also very conscious about the fact that if the company supplying them, they have to be able to pay their employees, and that the Costco business shouldn't be more than 25% of that company's sales, or otherwise there's a risk that their employees might be out of business if something happens to the Costco side. Costco, while maybe not perfect either, seems like a company that's like wanting to make sure that their suppliers and partners, the brands that they sell in their stores, are able to make money with the business, even though it's not a lot of money, but it is a money that can then pay for their employees and fix expenses. There's no value if they put a product on the shelf that does really, really well, but it's so cheap that nobody can make money along the way. And then 4 months later, it's gone out of the shelves. And then the members are unhappy that it's no longer available because they love the product, but the product was just not being able to make at a sustainable cost. So at the end of the day, you can try to grow really quickly. I've done that. My company's grown 100, 200% year over year on a big 8-figure base, and it's kind of crazy. And sometimes you got to ride that wave too, because it's given to you, but it's hard. Shit breaks, shit goes wrong. But also, like, at the end of the day, in order to have a sustainable business, you can still grow and grow nicely, but you have to make certain choices that are the right choices long-term that might short-term hurt you a little bit. You can choose to be the hare, or you can choose to be the tortoise. Probably the ideal is somewhere in the middle. The day, think of like building a company like building a farm. My dad taught me when I was young is that in nature, a quarter is 25 years, not 3 months like they teach at Wall Street. So that's kept up with me a long time, is that if you want to build anything meaningful, it often takes 25 years, not 3 months. And that's actually true for also the hypergrowth companies. If you think of like things like Facebook or Amazon, fastest growing companies at a certain time period in the whole world or in the history of the world, even those companies have been chugging along for a really long time to build something meaningful. So I would recommend thinking about the long term. When you look at companies that make really bold claims or seem to be too good at growing very fast based on a trend, a lot of those companies might not be here in 5 to 10 years. That was my video on why some companies last and others don't, and the 5 tips or lessons I've learned from growing a business over a decade and being a multi-generational family farmer. If you have other thoughts on stuff that like long-term minded companies, maybe Patagonia or others do really well, leave a comment below. I would love to learn from you as well. Hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and see you in the next video. Ciao, ciao.